All right, good. So it looks like we have most of our participants in the session, so we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Alex Weitzel, and I'm the Content Marketing Specialist at CourseKey. For those of you unfamiliar with CourseKey, we're a mobile attendance tracking platform used on more than 80 campuses across the country. We're very excited to bring you another awesome webinar today. For the next hour or so, we'll be hearing from Kevin Dishmon about tuning your workflows to maximize efficiency. Kevin, you can see his webcam right there. He's the Corporate Director of Academic Operations and Technologies at AHED Schools. He's a seasoned administrator with over 10 years of registrar operations support, technology training, and application administration in the higher ed sector. Prior to working at AHED Schools, he served as a campus registrar, corporate and regional registrar, national campus view technology trainer, and business analyst. A records manager by profession and a technology trainer by trade, he strongly believes in the role that technology plays in organizing thought, furthering learning, and advancing efficiencies. Before we get started, just another quick reminder that we have a Q&A discussion at the end, so feel free to submit any questions or comments throughout the presentation using the question function on your Zoom toolbar. All right, without any further ado, it's my pleasure to pass the mic over to Kevin. Hey, Kevin, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks, Alex. All right. Hey, I want to thank everyone for taking a moment out of their busy day to join us to come together and chat about workflows. Specifically, we're going to take a road trip on how to tune workflows and maximize efficiency, take a look at some little bits and pieces to help facilitate how you roll out workflows and how you manage those workflows. Before we get started, I just want to take a little stroll over to my workshop here, and let's talk about what's in our toolkit. As Alex had shared, I've been in the education sector for a number of years, and one of my personal mottos, a personal philosophy is that by teaching others, we teach ourselves. And that's a similar story probably that some of you have, or it might be a similar story that someone that you know might also share. And that philosophy is built around basically being engaged with the people we work with and being engaged with our peers and the people we train or the people we lead in our teams. So by teaching, we teach ourselves. By relating concepts, we observe, which means we're actively observing what we're relating. And by affirming, which means we're examining what's happening. So we're telling someone, hey, good job, which means we looked at the work that they did. So this kind of concept of teaching others is really what drives my ethos in my career. I'm a byproduct of technology, of the technology age. And what that means is I was around before internet. I'm still young. But one of my favorite stories about technology is my parents owned and bought the first 4K color computer from Radio Shack. So this is way back in the day when color was, not a thing. Nowadays it's ubiquitous, it's everywhere. But back in the day, 4K in color was, unknown. So I've been around technology my entire life. And as Alex mentioned, I'm a registrar by trade. And if you know any registrars, you probably know that some of the characteristics that they bring to the table, they're very detail oriented. We're archivists, we save information, we reference information. We have a strong draw to business practices, policies, and procedures. So sometimes folks might say that we live in the black and white. I like to say there are moments of gray, but yes, we generally try to keep things in separated lanes because that's the nature of our role as registrars and as records managers. Over the years, I've morphed a little bit and I've expanded my footprint into database. So I've worked on the front end, I've worked on the back end, and my current capacity, for example, among the many things I do, I'm a system administrator of our student information system. So every piece of configuration I'm responsible for, including upgrades and things like that. So I have a keen understanding of how databases and how data works together, including analytics and how data can still tell a story. One of the things I do quite often is I operate in a space where I see a need, I feel a need, and by doing that, I'm a process improvement hawk. Some might say that's a policy wonk where I write a lot of policy and procedures, but I try to meld those procedures to what people do in their job on a day-to-day basis. One of the things that I try to share with all of my learners or my teams that I've led or just in pushing workflows or sharing workflows or communicating workflows are the keystones of methodology, consistency, and integrity. Now, these might be different words for you, but in most times in workflows, you got to have some kind of stability, and that's what I call keystones. So with methodology, we're talking about following a pattern of steps or prescribed procedures. So we're always doing the same thing in the same manner every single time. Consistency, by doing things consistently, you build trust and rapport with your learners, your users, your teams, and you build confidence that things are getting done. I can't tell you enough stories about being a school registrar and stepping into a role where the first thing people say is, I send things to the registrar office, and I don't know if they get done. They just disappear. So you have a challenge of trust, and you have a challenge of confidence that things are truly getting done in a timely fashion. And finally, integrity. This goes without saying, doing the right thing, conducting business with a sense of wholeness and honesty is really telling, in that it speaks volumes of what your team does and what you do as a leader. When we talk about my workshop, I can probably just summarize it in an image here for you, that I sit at the crossroads of training, technology, operations, and compliance. So you might say, wow, Kevin, that's quite the crossroads there. And you're right. But in our talk today, in talking about workflows, it's a little bit of training and coaching. It's a little bit of leveraging the technology that you have, or looking at technology that you don't have to see where you can step up the game. Operations, it's how we do things, how things work, the workflow, the methodology, how things get done, how work gets done. And compliance, the integrity, doing the right thing. So we're all going to be subject to some sort of rule, regulation, or some kind of law, be it federal, state. And in the education sector, we all know that we have our accreditor, we have the feds, we have our corporate rule of law, and we have our teams. So what are our expectations from our teams, for example? So having said that, let's take a look at what we're going to talk about on today's call. First off, let's talk about workflows. It can be said that workflows are a holistic perspective from head to toe that shape and outline policies, standard procedures, universal business practices, delivery of those workflows, and the feedback that we receive in return to better ensure that those workflows are being successful. In effect, what we're saying is workflows craft a story, right? They have a beginning, they have a middle, and they have an end, and then sometimes we rewrite them, and sometimes we put them into a movie, and other times we just put them to print and publish those accordingly. So in crafting our story, that's what we're talking about when we speak of workflows, is that head to toe, full perspective of how things get done. What's our purpose here today? Why are we here? These are some of the questions that we'll be asking ourselves today. What are our current workflows? What's our inventory? Do we have a catalog of them? Where are they housed? How are they communicated? How do we share new workflows? What about changes or revisions? Do we honor a timeline between the life of a workflow and when it gets published for public consumption? That's important to remember, that you just don't throw things out there into the net sphere and hope that people will catch on. Do we set clear expectations? Do people catch on? And in order to have clear expectations, you have to be clear about what it is you expect the outcome to be and what you expect that person or that employee or that team's responsibility in contributing to the success of that workflow. And it goes without saying that with when you clearly set expectations on workflows, you can measure the success or failure of that workflow, because workflows are just not going to sit out there and take care of themselves, right? You got to have some measure of success or failure to know whether or not that workflow is working. And finally, is the technology that we're using ensuring success? Are we utilizing best in class? When I say best in class, I mean best for us. Every organization is going to have a different gamut of technology that they use to get the job done. And some of us don't have a billion-dollar company. So, we have to use what we have available, and I consider that to be what's best for us is best in class. But are we leveraging and maximizing the technology that we have to ensure that we are using our technology to the best of our ability? What's the outcome? What are we looking for? what's the end game? The end game from today's talk is that we want to walk away with the notion of embracing workflows. We want to embrace them as workflows, as evolving and ever-changing ecosystems. They don't stay static, and that's to be comfortable with that concept that workflows, we build them, we share them, we want them to be successful, but they're not going to take care of themselves. So we want to continually revisit them in some capacity, and that's what we're going to look at today. By the end of our talk today, to have a comfortability that workflows are ever-changing, they're evolving, and that's okay. And to understand how we can tackle those workflows to evolve them to the next level. Let's take a moment and take a rest here. Let's take a seat here. And this quote from Dale Carnegie, if you don't know who Dale Carnegie is, he was a change management guru. And what he truly was a storyteller. And that's part of the success of what he shared about influencing people is that we tell stories. And at the center of change is our people. And so when he says, keep your mind open to change all the time, you examine and re-examine your opinions and ideas, and you can progress. And that's what workflows are. They are continuing, evolving change management. Every time you implement a new workflow, when you change a new workflow, when you get feedback from a workflow, that's exactly what we're engaged in, is change management. One of Carnegie's, if you've read some of his books, the cornerstone of his books is people, and what it talks about is influencing people. And that's what workflows and technologies do. They influence your bosses, your coworkers, your teams, your direct reports, even people outside the organization that you may be working with. The workflows are influence people and folks to move in a direction towards an outcome. They may not move all together. They may not move at the same pace, but hopefully they're all moving together nonetheless to get to the end game, which is your workflow or an understanding of how we do business or how we do work. So let's take a moment, let's visualize what our purpose and our product is. Well, what's our outcome and what we're talking about today. Let's take a look at what that looks like in an infographic, for example. So what we can see here is that the roadmap of visualizing our purposes, the purposes of what is our current workflow, how are they communicated, do we set expectations, and are we ensuring that the technology we are using is successful? You can see the roadmap is not linear. It's not a straight line, right? It has lots of little curves and twists in it, and we should feel comfortable with that it's not a straight line, that it does have bumps in the road, and that it does require a diligence in ensuring that we're paying attention to our workflows and making sure that we're doing our stopping stations to be sure that our outcome, the end game of embracing workflows as change and evolving, is shared not just with ourselves but with everyone. So in this roadmap here, I've just put a couple of points, about 5 points, 5 stopping stations. And you could have a different image of what this mapping looks like when you share with your teams, or if you use it as a guide as to, we're going to change this procedure, we're going to change this policy. I think we can do better with student services and communicating concepts to our students, or financial services. How do we communicate better plans, payment plans, things like that. This is just a simple roadmap of how to get there. Starts with inventory. Again, from our purpose, what do we have? What kind of workloads do we have in our organization, or what kind of workflows do I have for my team? Catalog those. If we don't know what we have, we can't really get to where we need to be. Second step, feedback. You notice here feedback is in here twice. No, I didn't make a mistake and repeat myself, although I am known to do that. Feedback is essential. As we talked about before, change is about people. And so if we're not inserting feedback into our workflow and engaging other people to determine, is our technology still current? Is the workflow still working? Are these steps, do they make sense to a new person who gets hired? That's why feedback is important. So you want to understand what's the effect to your customers and clients. When I say customers and clients, that's kind of a ubiquitous term when I say that. But if I was to ask, who are my customers and clients in my current role, I have a lot of customers and I have a lot of clients. I have people that I work with at the corporate level that are my peers in financial aid, to executive management, to our company's board. I've got faculty at the campus. folks that I have never seen. I'm a remote employee. I've never seen these folks, but I have accountable responsibility to understand how workflows affect people's lives and their work days. My customers are campus presidents, people who manage our profit centers, and ensuring that, the workflows that are being pushed out or shared, do they make sense for the leaders of our campuses? Students are also my clients. I manage the portals for our company. So campus portals where students can go to get their official transcripts, where they check their grades, where they check their financial aid awards and things like that. So implementing new workflows, new systems and things like that, I have to remember, hey, students are also one of my clients. External to the company, we have contracts with external entities, whether it be the Student Information System, Parchment Inc. that manages our transcripts. So I have to understand the workflows and how that feedback can affect all of that customer base when we're considering what workflows we want to push out. Delivery, how are our deliverables managed? And by that I mean, when you push out workflows or you're pushing out items for consumption to your clients, you got to consider how you're delivering that, and we'll talk about that today. Again, feedback, meaning input from customers. Hey, this workflow doesn't work for us. We don't understand why step A comes before step B. Shouldn't B come before A? That's an example of input from customers that it might not be working. So you want to invest in feedback. And the step 5 is evaluation, which is sort of like an outcropping of feedback in that you're taking all your feedback that you're getting from your client base and you're determining and evaluating whether or not your workflow is still efficacious. Is it still effective? Is it still working? So you're taking proposals for change and redirecting your workflow, or redirecting your path so that you can revise the workflow so that it's working better for the people that are actually using it. You're creating it, or we're creating it, but other people are using it, and that's what matters, the people portion. Before the call, you might have been asked to take a little short poll or short survey, and the reason for that was just to get you thinking about the technologies that you have at your organizations or at your campus, or what technologies you use for your team to get the job done. And also, what is your place in that process? One of the questions had to do with, technology savviness. How well are you at technology, and what is your perspective on how you affect, how you intake technology, and how well you are at new tech? So are you a wizard? I could probably say I'm a wizard. I'm pretty good at hardware and software. I'm a maven at software, that's for certain. You get me behind inside of a box of a computer, I might have to call one of the IT network administrators in the company to help with that. But if it's software, I'm all about it. Some people, they only use technology as needed, or they only use it for their job role, and hey, that's okay. But the key here is to understand how your consumers use technology and how they come to understand how technology plays in their role or in their job role. Another item we looked at was policy and practice creation. So this has to do with, your workflows. How do these things come to life, and who's involved? Are you the go-to person? Are you the Kevin of your organization, where policies generally flow through, and then they move on to the next step to get approval? Or maybe you don't have any involvement in policy and you're just on the sidelines. Or maybe you're on the sidelines, but you'd like to get involved. So some of these things we talk about today, these are the kind of questions just to get you thinking about where you are in that workflow kind of system, and where you might want to step in and have greater impact, more import into how workflows come together. Learning and sharing, that was the question that was asked, because not everyone is comfortable sitting in front of a video camera and sharing their view or their concept on on a subject matter. Some folks don't like to do that. Some folks are not wired for that. Some prefer to sit in the background and let the experts do the work. Some are super users, meaning they know everything there is about technology. Early in my career, I was a super user of our student information system. So I moved from a campus to a corporate level position where I became a technology trainer, as Alex had mentioned, where I was training a company of 75 schools on how to use Campus Nexus. So if you were a new hire, I was one of the first folks that you probably spoke with to get your feet wet on just the basics of using the student information system. So others are, they're kind of the go-to people. They're the person in the office to say, hey, you know what, you know Word better than I do. Can you help me with this? But that same person might not know much about Excel. And all of those kind of gamuts of experience with learning and sharing are all valuable in an organization or on a team. And they're also valuable in determining how you develop your workflows, sustain your workflows, redesign your workflows over time. Communicating expectations, again, that's an important piece in that when we talk about communicating expectations, we're speaking of, do people understand what they need to do for a workflow? Do they understand their accountable responsibility in a workflow? And how do we communicate that is part of the delivery. Remember our roadmap when we talked about how are things delivered. Do you use a document management software? Do you use email? I have a lot of folks in my organization that love email. They live in email. I am the opposite. I will find every single way to leverage technology to get people out of their email so they can share, thoughts and concepts without having to, well, did you get my email from Thursday? Well, I don't know. That was like 10 emails ago on the same thread. Face-to-face meetings, meeting in a conference room together. I can tell you as a remote employee, I don't have face-to-face meetings, like next to never. However, I leverage technology to bring folks together and bring them closer to myself so that we are kind of in the same space. But if you're in face-to-face meetings where you're sharing new workflows, new policies, new procedures, new catalogs, new business plans, those kind of things, that's certainly an advantage because you can sit across from each other, see facial expressions, disagree with one another, and then walk away as friends. Other types of areas, network shared or a network or shared drive. Some folks have places where they store repositories of information on a network drive where several people or many people have access to the shared drive. That's an example of how to share community expectations. Give you an example, I leverage SharePoint. 5 years ago, we didn't have SharePoint in our organization. So really leveraging our SharePoint space at our organization that I don't personally email attachments anymore. I will provide a breadcrumb to SharePoint, or I'll provide a hyperlink to SharePoint. And that is enrich that types of communication because I'm killing two birds with one stone. One, I'm providing the answer, I'm delivering my workflow. And the second part is I'm giving that person the advantage, the opportunity of being able to find that information themselves, getting them to go to SharePoint rather than asking someone to email it to them, for example. That's a social space. It's an example of a social space when you're using SharePoint, types of technology like SharePoint to do that. And the unknown means you don't know how things are delivered. I just know I'm told to go somewhere and get it. I don't have any involvement. And that's also a reality of our workflows, that some of our employees and our contributors, they are consumers. That's all they do. And they don't have any participation in how things come to life when it comes to workflow. In the middle there, you'll see a grid about the technology inventory, and that's an example when we're doing inventory of what our workflows are, what are our policies, what are our procedures. It's also about technology inventory. What are we using to deliver our workflows? What are we using to deliver our expectations? What are we using to deliver our feedback? All of those type of things are involved in technology. And I just have a few examples here, such as document management. If you're using Adobe, or SharePoint, or if you are using a learning management system such as Moodle or Canvas, how you're communicating with your faculty or your faculty are communicating with your students. Web conferencing like we're doing here today, using Zoom or GoToMeeting, where you are sharing things through a visual representation, which can certainly connect much sooner with your consumers, with your clients. One of the items I'm trying to get my organization to do is we use web conference, we pay for web conference. You can have an unlimited number of Zoom basic accounts when you're a pro customer. Why not use web conferencing for student services when you're engaging with students? Why are we not holding financial aid meetings face-to-face with students through web conferencing. So you're connecting with folks, you're delivering your workflow, you're setting expectations, and you're also creating a technology, setting a standard of technology that's really ahead of the game with other competitors probably, right? Student information system, I happen to use Campus Nexus. Some folks use Ellucian, some people use PeopleSoft, but really this is where you manage all of your data in a central location, a central hub where everyone is accessing the same data at the same time, which is also an example of where your workflows are. I would be silly if I didn't say that I built workflows based upon my student information system. A lot of what I do is based upon and shaped around how we expect things to appear in the system. As we all know, data is king. And so if we're not putting in good data, we're going to be getting out bad data. Same thing as workflows. If we're not putting together solid workflows and allowing them to evolve, you're certainly probably not going to get to the end game, which is having a workflow that continues to evolve and change. So having said that, let's take a first stop on our road trip. Let's talk about inventory, which is really probably the bigger bulk of our conversation here today. And that is the who, what, where of workflows, and really looking internally to understand what we are doing today. So we want to take stock of our current workflows. And so some of our considerations that we want to talk about is how are they bound? Who owns them? One of our questions in our poll, we asked, are you a participant in your policy writing, or are you sit on the sidelines and you're just a consumer? And so part of that is ownership. Are they corporate owned? Are they owned by a division, by a department? Or do you have your own mini workflows that determine how your teams do business? Quantity versus quality. When you write policies, you could have 15 pages. That might work for you. I know from my client base, 15 pages will not work for them. Too many pages, they get lost. So do you have lots of policies, or do you try to keep them concise so that you leverage quality over quantity? I'm not saying either one is bad or good, but we all know that once we write one policy, next thing we know, we got 50 policies. And the first question I get from people is, I don't know where to find it. Which one is it in? I don't know which bullet, which page is that on? So you want to give that some consideration. Where are they stored in Access? So, we all want to make sure that our policies are somewhere where everyone can get to them, but we have to consider security. Are they accessible? Are they on a network drive? Are they on SharePoint? Are they on a document side? Do we keep them externally? I've worked in organizations where they've had separate platforms to maintain things like Policy Hub, where it's a software that we don't own, that we may license, but we keep all of our items externally, which is just another technology that people have to learn and understand and navigate, and that we have to help them understand. Are your policies and your workflows, are they relatable, followable, understandable? So we can write anything we need and anything we want, but if people are not understanding what we're writing, it's all for naught. Learning and sharing, do you use a village or self-directed? What I mean by village is a group of people come together, and they have a problem, we have a question, we want to find a solution, let's get a workflow together. Let's get a policy, a procedure, a standing operating procedure, a business, a procedure to shape around this problem so we can have a solution. Or self-directed, meaning someone pushes out the policy and then you're expected to go find it, read it, and understand it. So, quite often when we onboard people for orientations and things like that, we might have an agenda of things that they're doing, which is always a great thing because you can have a checklist, right? You can make sure that your new hire is going by each point, and they come to the point where, oh, these are the policies or workflows that are relevant to your job, and this is where you go to look at them. And if you have a question, come talk to me. Or do we sit with them and we go through them together? It just depends on, what your approach is at your own organization. And then finally, feedback. As you remember from our roadmap, feedback figures prominently a couple of times in our work roadmap. In your feedback, getting complaints, or as I call them, opportunities or suggestions to do better or to modify our current workflows, and to find out, is the workflow working as intended? If our workflows become obsolete, or folks tend to, as I call it, put a finger in the dike. We all know the story of the little boy putting the finger in the dike to stop the workflow, plugging the leak themselves. They won't stop and they won't ask questions. They won't find out, hey, this is not working, or hey, this doesn't make sense. They'll make up their own solution to stop a perceived problem before it grows unstoppable, rather than raising their flag and saying, hey, this is not really working for us, or this is not working for the 5 of us. It's not working for an entire team, for example. So you want to be sure that you want to consider that the workflow has an opportunity for feedback. So let's talk about some solutions. Some solutions, and we talked about, and that's why we're here today, is to talk about what kind of workflows we have and what kind of technologies we have and how we deliver those workflows. And so some solutions on to help us bridge the gap in answering some of the questions from our considerations. I've already mentioned SharePoint. Obviously, I must like SharePoint. It's easily maintained. You might say, well, Kevin, that seems like a lot of work. We might have to hire someone to do that. I'll tell you, we don't have a SharePoint administrator. Okay, so using our current technology, using what we understand SharePoint can do, and really leveraging that space to really deliver what we need in workflows and communicating with our client base, that you might have the same situation. If you can just understand how to maintain a document library, for example, that could be a solution in and of itself. Network drives, as I mentioned, are common, and this is where you can maintain an Excel worksheet with items of cataloged items that are your workflows, and they might match to a naming convention of your listed documents. And I can't underscore enough naming convention. If you were to ask me, Kevin, what's the #1 saving grace in developing workflows? Naming convention, consistency, and methodology when it comes to designing workflows and naming them. Makes it easier for your clients and for your customers to find them and to use them. Because if you expect them to use them, they got to be able to find them. Acrobat, if you've not used Acrobat Pro, it's a very malleable, very flexible software that allows you to create fillable forms. If you've ever went through and you've gotten a document or a workflow, or you have a document attached to a workflow and you've gotten it 5 different ways from 5 different people because you sent it to Word and everybody changed their Word document to fit their own need, that's an example where Acrobat fillable forms might be helpful. Do you need a special software for that? Yes, you do need a pro license, but I can tell you that the results or the benefits of having a pro account are just outstanding. You can lock down documents for security and e-sign, which is important. A little short tip here is e-signing is kind of the next venture I want to push our organization into. If you don't have the revenue to implement a document management system like DocuSign, for example, which can be cost prohibitive for some organizations, at least you want to get there to some degree where you are at least getting a semblance of a document management workflow. And e-signing with Acrobat is an answer to that. Office 365, if you don't have Office 365, it could be helpful to have it. It is another license-based software. But with Office 365, for example, if you have a team that all have Office 365 accounts, you can share a document to just your team, and they are able to edit and add and live real space on the cloud, for example. So I can be where I'm located, and I can have a team member in Chicago, a team member in Florida, a team member in Alaska, and we're on the same team, and we're in Office 365 in the same document. It's live and constantly updating with our feedback, for example. And the last one, because it's last on the list, because as I've mentioned, it's my least favorite communication tool, is email. If you do have to use email, you want to make sure you probably couple it with an additional technology. For example, Word enables you to use track changes. It seems complicated. I know when you open up track changes in a Word document, or if you're trying to establish track changes, it probably blows your mind. It's like, well, what are all these options? All I want to do is just know who changed something or what was changed. Getting into that, and having someone on your team that perhaps is the expert on that, and get them up to speed, and so that they can share that with your group. I've done that many times in my career where I've had teams and I've tagged with one person as being a leader. People want to lead. They want to take charge. So let them have the opportunity, for example, and tag someone with that ability to say, hey, Tom, I want you to learn everything about track changes in Word, because I want to start using we want to start using that for our team to track changes to documents, for example. We're going to take another seat here and just take a moment. I want to take a moment to relate how workflows and all these concepts in delivery work in real life situations. Some years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, I had a challenge. The challenge was my organization removed all registrars from ground campuses. So we had 12 campuses at that time, and we had one corporate office. And in my corporate office, I had a team of 5. So my team of 5 was replacing a team of 12. And when we talk about registrar operations, it's the full gamut. I'm not talking about one piece. I'm talking about all pieces, everything from transcripts, enrollment verifications, third-party communications, subpoenas, school status changes from attending to graduate or from attending to probation or what have you, including course scheduling. I used to have 12 people that I helped to do that. Now I had to bring all course scheduling from all 12 schools in-house to 5 people with a population that I believe at that time was well over like 1,200, possibly 2,000 students. So that's a lot of scheduling, let me tell you. Grades and attendance, thankfully, we had campus portal. So our grades and attendance were posted through a portal, which is probably an experience that many people in today's meeting have. But even so, when you remove 12 persons that had accountability for making sure quality assurance was there, that rolled into the corporate office. So quality assurance, quality assurance, quality assurance. I told you I repeat myself. That became a really center focus of, okay, we had 12 people to do this. Now I've got 5 people, and with one person's out sick, that means I've got 4 people, right? It's important. It was important for me to understand, okay, wow, how do I do this? Add to this that it wasn't a transition. It was night and day. We had 12 people on Friday, and then on Monday we had none. So it was me hit the ground running to find out, okay, how do I reshape this workflow so that it can meet those checkpoints that I mentioned before. So the end game was to reshape the workflow ecosystem so that it allows for evolution and change, not to mention bringing all those items from outside the corporate office into the corporate office. So one of the first things I had to look at was our workflow. So just like we talked about here to assess our workflows, what steps are needed to complete tasks? Who owns the task? Is there an existing procedure or process? And who are the stakeholders? And that's important. Remember, we talked about the who's involved in that workflow and who would be impacted. Number 2, I had to assess the resources. What kind of resources do I have in order to move these 12 operations in-house to the 5 people, full-time people that I had on my team? I had to establish a new task owner. So some things I had to centralize, decide, okay, how am I going to centralize this? Am I going to give transcripts to this one person, or am I going to split it between these 2 people, or am I going to take the number of campuses and split them across 5 people? So that was a challenge. Road mapping new steps. We might have had old steps, but now I have to revise the steps to fit the need for only 5 people doing the work. I had to clock the time to fulfill the task, how much time it got from point A to point B. Of course, minimize the effect on the client, which, remember, I mentioned my clients were students, faculty, campus staff, and then finally, champion feedback. So, of course, with registrars being removed from the schools where they used to have face-to-face engagement with registrars, now they don't have that. Now they have some guy in the sky called Kevin with 5 people on his team that now manage this full gamut of operation and workflow. And the third thing I had to look at was technology. How do I optimize communication? I established dedicated fax lines, for example, so that people could fax directly from a certain number whenever they needed, however they needed. And this, again, is 5 years ago, and I have much better leverage of technology today than I did back then. Smooth out document flows. I had to smooth out the workflow. If it had 5 steps, I had to consider, well, maybe I need 3. 5 is too many. Maximize existing technology. So whatever I was using already, I had to figure out how can I really leverage the technology that I have. I have Portal. How can I make Portal work even harder for us? Or SharePoint. I have SharePoint, and we have grade changes. how do I get grade changes from a ground campus communicated to corporate office? That was a huge challenge because grade changes happen. They're a reality. And attendance changes. They're a reality. Choices, I had to make choices, paper over electronic. Do I keep existing processes with just paper, or can I find some way to make it electronic, like using Adobe Acrobat, for example? And again, championing feedback, which is also really important throughout your workflows. So when we talk about our roadmap, we talked about delivery and some of the considerations that we need to take into account when we talk about delivery is, at the top, if you hear the bullet, efficiency, it has a voracious appetite. You have to be very vigilant with your workflows to make sure that they remain efficient. And of course, that does consume some time. Too much too fast can undermine the effectiveness of your workflows. If you're throwing too much at people, they get confused and they don't understand. Or worse, they stop listening, right? And if you're too slow, then things just go off the track and things go wrong, and then you're just involved in the cleanup process. You want to make sure that you're sticking to your methodology. Don't change lanes and then change directions, because people are not going to be able to follow you if you're changing lanes in how you develop workflows. And our technology, making sure our technology is keeping pace with our delivery. So whether we're doing things fast and furious or slow and steady, leveraging technology to make sure that we are keeping pace with our workflows and with our client base. I've listed here a few of the solutions. I want to just point out a couple of them that I think that are important. Number one, web conferencing. I can't stress enough web conferencing, getting face-to-face. It is the digital age, folks, and it's the age in which we live in. And as we talked about our end game, to embrace evolving change, web conferencing is part of that change. And also the last two bullets there, stay the course. You want to maintain your methodology and ensure your delivery is consistent. And remember what we said about consistency, that it builds rapport, it builds trust, and it builds confidence that things are getting done. Let's take another seat here. Another message from Dale Carnegie. In speaking of, leaders are responsible for the communication of their vision. And so by saying that, what I mean is, we have these workflows, and workflows we already have said are change. It's change management. It's about influencing people to move in a certain direction. And what we need to remember is, just because we understand the need, the purpose, the reason, that doesn't mean everyone else does. And so if we go into designing workflows or managing workflows with that concept in mind, we're better off for it, because we understand that it won't be as smooth as we think, because there's going to be someone in the corner over in Illinois that is just like, this doesn't make any sense to me, and I don't know why they're making this. I don't understand why they're making this do it. You get the cross-armed perspective, and then you have to convince them that it's the right answer, it's the right thing to do. So having said that, that's where we want to segue into feedback, because that is what leaders describing what the vision is. It's talking about feedback. It's explaining what's happening, and it's also listening. And that's the question here. Are we listening to what people are saying and identifying trouble areas with our workflows? So some of the considerations that we might take into consideration when we talk about our feedback are, do our consumers have an avenue to respond? Are we soliciting that feedback openly? Are we taking is it our road or the high road perspective, or is it a round table? I had an ex-CEO once time, he said to the company, "This is not a democracy," which in a word means you do what I say, and that's the end of it. So you want to consider, how workflows come to being. Do you have a round table where people can sit around and have their 2 cents kind of an idea? And that's what I used to do with my team. I presented a problem, and I said, hey, let's talk about the solution. Let's get ideas together. So a lot of the solutions we came up with were a team effort. And again, that's how you build synergy. That's how you build confidence, because you're selling it to your team, and your team is selling it to the teams outside of your office or outside of your company. Some solutions, a solution box, for example. I call a solution box, not a suggestion box, because you want to invest in your workflows a culture of, hey, I hear you have a complaint. I hear it's not working for you. How would it work better for you? So you want to invest in the opportunity for them to have a little bit of feedback, but also give them responsibility, right? Responsibility that if they present the problem, let me hear about the solution. And also, how you're communicating, thank you for your inquiry. Thank you for your suggestion. Obviously, we're not going to use everything everybody ever suggests, but they want to be heard. And that's part of what this feedback loop is all about, is helping folks to understand that they are being heard. Our next step on our roadmap, if you remember, we're going to take a seat here, and it's talk about evaluation. So part of what our conversation today is about efficaciousness. And the efficacious means successful in producing a desired or intended result. Is it effective? And that is the whole purpose of workflows, right? That's the whole purpose of procedures, best practices, and the like, is to achieve a desired outcome, and we want it to be effective. So when we talk about evaluation, which is an extension of our feedback, are we applying what we learned? So when we speak about that, we have regular review workflows. We're looking at our workflows. We're continuously looking at them. We just don't throw them out there into the manosphere and then hope they figure themselves out. We got to pull them back every now and again and revisit them. Is the workflow efficacious? Is it effective? If it's not effective, get rid of it. It's not working. It's wasting people's time. It's wasting your time. Remember our keystones for workflows: methodology, consistency, integrity. Doing things the same way, doing it on time, the same way every single time, and doing it with honesty. And then last up is technology, doing your checkups. When you go back to your workflows and you check at what technology you're currently using, you want to look at, I had this great idea that Kevin brought up about looking at what we're using as part of our technology in our workflows. When we're using a lot of email, let's talk about how we can reduce our email usage. And right there, you've started the conversation already. So throughout this top conversation and throughout our talk today, we talked about a roadmap. We talked about technology. We talked about delivery. We talked about feedback, which is really important, and interspersed throughout our workflow to make sure that we are paying attention to what people have to say to us. So at the top of our talk, we had a purpose and we had a product. So what we wanted to see was, we had some questions that we asked ourselves at the beginning of our talk. And so now we want to find out, do we really answer those questions? So when we talk about our purpose, we talked about our inventory. So do we understand our inventory? So now we understand the quantity, the depth, and breadth of our inventory. And that's what you want to strive for, is to understand what you have, how much you have, how deep it goes, and whether or not you can revise it to shorter steps, less procedures, less workflow, and to consider whether or not your client and your customers are really using those. That'll be one of the guides or one of the instruments you use to determine, in your workshop, well, we need to get rid of 5 of these because we don't even do this anymore. We grasp how we communicate workflows. So we have an understanding of how we push out workflows, how we share them, whether it be SharePoint or a shared drive or heaven forbid through email. But we need to understand how we communicate those workflows. We see where and how expectations come to life and how change is about people. So we understand how workflows come to life, whether it's a committee, if it's from a division level, if it's from a corporate level, whether you have certain policies or certain workflows that you use to govern your own team or help your team to be successful, not necessarily govern, but usually help them to be successful. And to remember that change is about people, that we just don't throw things out there and hope that it sticks, but to remember that change involves people, and it's up to us to share the vision and help them understand why the change is needed and why it's beneficial to them. Last bullet up here, we have a new outlook on how technology shapes our workflows, right? So when you take an inventory of your technology and to determine whether or not it's working, you take a new outlook. Maybe Word is not the best tool. Maybe Excel is a better tool. I use a lot of pivot tables in my organization. I do a lot of analytics for my organization, from attendance to financial aid to packaging to who's attending, who's not, who's been 3 days absent, who's not. So in order to achieve that objective, I had to take a look at the technology that we're using and the technology that I knew how to use, and then also to find out how how could I become more versed with the technology that I was using to achieve these outcomes for our organization that continues to change every month, every week, every year. Our objectives and our workflow changes, so I had to change with it. And one of those items is learning pivot tables. If you don't know what pivot tables are, once you Google it, you'll understand what I'm saying. So all of these questions we asked at the beginning of our talk, and what it brought us to was, what's the end game? And has our end game changed? No, it has not. Our end game remains the same. That in looking at our roadmap and taking a road trip to see, how workflows come to life, what are we using to deliver them? How are we communicating them? And the feedback, are we listening to what our client base is saying to us about those workflows and what we need to change about them? And that is to embrace workflows that they're constantly evolving, and they're changing ecosystems all the time. When I say that the workflows are in themselves their own ecosystems, they have their own life. And so what we want to do is pay attention to all those variables to understand how we might need to make a change. As we close up our call here, or I close up my portion of our share here, we want to remember the elements of our roadmap here: inventory, feedback, delivery, feedback. I didn't repeat myself, it's there intentionally, and then evaluation to understand, what workflows we have and how they're pushed out, and then finally, how we revise them in order to craft our story of our workflows. And with that, I leave you to craft your own story with your own workflows to determine how your workflows are working, and really leverage your workflows to tell a good story and share a good vision of how you want your workflows to be shared and understood by your organization. Hey, I really appreciate your time today. I'm going to give it back to Alex, and remember to be vigilant. That's the number one thing I'd probably share with you.
All right. Thanks, Kevin. That was an awesome presentation. It was very interesting to hear about your strategy for evaluating workflows, some of the technologies that you recommend, and your story about how you tackled going from 12 people to 5 people. It's really interesting. And I want to now open it up to our audience members for the Q&A section. If you haven't submitted your questions yet, please do so now. We have a few minutes. Kevin, while they're submitting their questions, I have one for you. You
Sure.
mentioned the importance of feedback. We see it twice on the list here, and giving clients and customers an avenue to respond. My question to you is, how do you strike the balance between giving them an avenue to respond or you taking it directly to them? What is your strategy around getting that feedback that's so desperately needed?
Sure, it's a great question. It's obviously, in the way you pose the question, it's a two-way street. Obviously, we all know communication is two-way, right? But it doesn't always work that way. What I often will do is, I'll share a workflow, I'll schedule a call, or I'll schedule a voice conference or what have you. But the main thing is if rather than just pushing it out into the netosphere right away, you give a request for comment. If you've not heard that before, accreditation sites do that all the time. The federal government does that all the time, where you give an opportunity for folks to give a feedback. Other thing is, what I've done is, hey, I know that 40 people attended a web conference, and I will pick 3 of those people and call them up and say, hey, you know what? We shared a workflow today. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think it went well? Do you think the tenets of the workflow are going to work for you, for what you do or what you do in your team? So you're doing both. You're giving an opportunity for your customer base to give feedback, but you're also soliciting. And I don't mind telling you that when you step out your sphere and you solicit those kind of things, solicit feedback, it spreads like wildfire. People have an understanding that, hey, Kevin is interested in what I think about his workflows, and that when he rolls out policies, or when the company rolls out policies, no, Bill, that's not true. They're not just going to do it and then we have no say. No, there is an opportunity for feedback. So you create a culture of feedback as well.
Okay, gotcha. We have another question here from one of our attendees. It says, how do you manage the vast amount of information that is on a SharePoint site or the logic behind how it was developed. That seems to be a big challenge when it comes to finding information where there's so much available.
You're absolutely right. You know, and if I showed you our SharePoint, I've seen some awesome SharePoint sites. I've worked at large global organizations where they had a team of people that managed SharePoint. We don't have that here. What we have is just a document site. So what I would probably recommend is, yeah, there's a lot of information on SharePoint, but one of the things we shared is being consistent, keeping your information or keeping your workflows in a central location and always referencing that location. We're human beings. We like repetitive things. That's how a lot of people learn. A lot of people learn by repetition or by showing. So if there's a central location, or maybe you have just a site and you have several folders, or you have a site and you have separate tiles, you want to think about organizing them intuitively so that when people are visiting that page, they're not getting lost. It is a great question, because that's one of the challenges we had with our policy and procedures, that people couldn't find them. Not just find them, they knew where they were, but they didn't know in which folder, or is that called, you know, organizational structure, or is that called human resources? So when you have that, you want to take a look at your SharePoint site and just do an inventory to find out how many different ways can a person find information on this site, and how can I get it so that they are directed directly to the place that I need them, or we need them to go, so they're not running around looking for information. SharePoint sites can be, you know, cumbersome, but that, again, that's if you have a large organization, if you have a large SharePoint site. We don't have that challenge. We have, you know, several key places where people typically visit, and you just need to be able to drive traffic to those locations.
All right, gotcha. The last question that I have here for you is, when revising or restructuring workflow, how do you ensure that there's not a drop-off in efficiency while you're implementing that change?
Correct. Yeah, that's an excellent question. You know, that goes back to our consideration of evaluation, you know, when you're getting feedback and whether or not your workflows are being effective. So when you're developing workflows, what I always do is I try to invest some notion of how am I going to quantify the results of this workflow. So for our student information system, I may quantify that by pulling data reports. If I expect certain things to be uploaded, if I expect certain things to bear certain dates, you leverage, you know, certain technologies like that where you can do reporting out of a system. You know, to know if people are following the workflow, that's also a challenge. So if people are off kilter, they're not following the workflow, and then you don't find out about it until 5 minutes later, and then now you've got a bunch of information, data, paperwork that doesn't match your expectations. What I recommend is important to step into your workflows. I'd mentioned, you know, part of the advantage of being the author of workflows here at my organization is that I step into them. I see if they work, I try them out, I test them in the system. If I'm saying click A, B, C, I'll go click A, B, C. So in your workflows, when you take your inventory and you go through your steps, put yourself into that workflow to determine if it's working, and therefore you can develop an understanding of how to know if people are actually following it. And if you implement it and people are not, you know, if you implement a new workflow, maybe put a calendar date about 30 days or 2 weeks out or 3 weeks out to take a health test to determine whether or not people are following it. Does it work? And do you need to revise it? That would be my recommendation.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. We had one more question come in here about SharePoint, and the attendee is wondering, can you give a quick example of how SharePoint helped you with efficiency of a workflow?
Let's see. Sure. Well, in education space, there's tons of things that we have to be responsible for regulating, and one of those areas is satisfactory academic progress. You cannot draw down Title IV funds if you're not evaluating your students for satisfactory academic progress. So one of the challenges we had was SAP was being ran maybe once a week, maybe they ran it every term, but the bottom line is it has to be run every single end of term, and that was the challenge. So we brought satisfactory academic progress in-house, but what we use SharePoint for is we push out the evaluation results of the SAP, for example. So we have, for example, Excel worksheets that are always maintained the exact same way. They're organized the exact same way. and we set expectations about how our users or how our customers would engage with those worksheets or what we expected them to do with them. So that's an example of leveraging SharePoint for satisfactory academic progress. Another example is shared files. For example, a shared file with another director for scheduling our online classes is another example how I leverage, or how we have leveraged SharePoint, where I never even pick up the phone to talk to this lady. Every now and again I'll talk to her, but mostly we use SharePoint as a two-way communication. She updates with faculty assignments, I take her faculty assignments, and we deploy them to the system. So in using SharePoint, you can leverage a two-way communication, or you can have it, and so it's a structured format that, hey, this is the document I'm sharing, this is how I expect it to be used, this is what you would use it for to answer the questions that we expect to be answered, and therefore creating a solid, holistic workflow in how you expect documents to be used on SharePoint.
Okay. The last question that we have here isn't so much about the subject matter, but she's wondering, can we get a copy of the presentation via a PDF file? And before you say anything, Kevin, I just want to remind her that we will be sending the presentation to everyone via email, although it will be the recorded webinar. But Kevin, I'll let you decide what you'd like to do with your content.
Sure. I'm more than happy to share. I believe the question is sharing the deck. Absolutely. I'll be sending my Starbucks reloadable gift card with you. No, I'm just kidding. No, that's not a problem. Yeah. As I told Alex, a lot of this is me sharing information with you and keeping the deck as light as possible. So if the deck is going to help you to reinvent your workflows or revisit your workflows, I'm all about it. Not a problem.
Okay, sweet. We'll get that over to you guys. Well, that's all the questions that we have for our Q&A, and we're just about at time here, so we'll wrap up the webinar here. Thanks everyone again for spending part of your day with us, and thank you especially to Kevin Dishmon for your expertise on tuning your workflows to maximize efficiency. This was an awesome webinar, and very grateful that you were able to spend some time with us too, Kevin.
Happy to do it.
So as a reminder to everyone, you can go to the CourseKey website and sign up there for our newsletter to make sure that you don't miss any future webinars or other content that we put out. So that's just at CourseKey.com. Thanks again, everyone, for your time, and thank you, Kevin.
Absolutely. Talk to you later, Alex.
Talk to you later. Bye.